Hello and welcome to a new lesson in communication research. I am Sakshi Mandwal and the subject expert is Dr. Debarati Dhar, Assistant Professor at Vivekananda Institute of Professional Studies, Delhi. Today in this module, we will be discussing about one research method, namely content analysis. In our previous modules, we have understood about research methodologies and their types. In the present module, we would be discussing about content analysis, its definition and significance in communication research. The present module will discuss about a specific research method that is used largely in media research. This method is called content analysis. The method is very popular among mass communication researchers as it is an effective way for investigating the content of media, like the number of commercials or types of advertisements in print or broadcasting media. It is said that content analysis is considered as one of the valuable tools for researchers. In simpler words, interpretation of what is contained in a message can be described as content analysis. Interestingly, the existing literature commonly uses the term content analysis in a generic way, while the qualitative study of media text is diversely called textual analysis or discourse analysis. Content analysis is described as the scientific study of content of communication. It is the study of the content with reference to the significances, contexts and meanings contained in the messages. Content analysis is defined as the process of studying the written, spoken or visual communication messages. It is the method of analyzing recorded human communications. The term content denotes what is contained, and in content analysis it is basically the analysis of what is contained in a message or script. So in other words, content analysis can be described as the way where the content of the message forms the base for drawing interpretations and conclusions about the topic under study. A number of definitions have been given by scholars for content analysis. To sum up, content analysis can be defined as the research technique for the objective, systematic and quantitative description of the apparent content of communication. To put simply, content analysis is the technique for making inferences by objectively and systematically identifying and studying specified characteristics of messages. Thus, from the above introduction, we gather that content analysis is a method of studying and analyzing communication in a systematic, objective and quantitative manner for measuring variables. Mapping of popular representations is done through content analysis technique by social scientists. In media and communication studies, content analysis is used to study political and public debates about how its citizens and their concerns should collectively be portrayed by the media in a democratic society. Content analysis starts with the precise statement of the objectives or research questions to be examined. On the basis of the question of what is to be explored, the researcher frames the objectives for study, which is followed by locating a source of communication relevant to the research question and asks questions that can be solved by content analysis. The main objective of content analysis is to convert recorded unused raw phenomena into coded data that can be treated in a scientific manner, essentially so that a framework of knowledge may be built up. Content analysis usually comprises formulation of research question or objectives that is followed collection of communication content sample and development of content categories. The researcher then goes on to finalizing the units for analysis and preparing a coding schedule, pilot testing as well as checking the intercoder reliabilities. The last and the most important step is analyzing the collected data for reaching to a conclusion. Definition of content analysis. The qualitative study of media text is variously called textual analysis or discourse analysis. In a sense, quantitative social sciences have monopolized the generic term content analysis as suggested by classic titles like Content Analysis and Communication Research, Berelson, 1952. Content analysis is defined as a research technique for the objective, systematic and quantitative description of the evident content of communication. The central distinction in the analytical process, as suggested by theorists, is between knowledge and interpretation of media content. While the end goal of any research is to make interpretations of the media messages and also to understand their relationship with either the intentions of senders or the consequences for the attitudes and behaviors of receivers, it is important to understand that such interpretation must not be mixed into the analytical process. The difference appears from the statement that knowledge of the content can legitimately support inferences even about non-content events. Reviewing the existing literature takes us to further definitions of content analysis. For example, it can be simply described as a research technique for making replicable and valid inferences from data to their context. The definitions have been constantly worked upon and developed by the scholars, wherein some definitions were found to be explicitly critical of certain existing definitions. According to some definitions, content analysis must be replicable and therefore systematic, and it is in no way must be restrictive to one research approach, and it also dismisses the exclusion of latent meanings from the researcher's genuine horizon of interest. Unlike much research data on audiences, media texts and cultural sites usually exist before the research that seeks to understand them. There are two families of research on texts: research concerning structure and discourse. With each of these, there are both qualitative and quantitative approaches and considerable interaction between these. Quantitative content analysis may be seen as interface of observation and document analysis. It is defined as a method of observation in the sense that instead of asking people to respond to questions, it takes the communication that people have produced and asks questions of communications. Kurlinger, 1986. Thus, it is also considered as an unassuming or non-reactive technique of social research. A number of definitions of content analysis are available by scholars. As per Berelson, 1952, content analysis is a research technique for the objective, systematic and quantitative description of the manifest content of communication. In the book Content Analysis and Communication Research by Bernard Berelson, 1952, this technique has been given immense recognition as one versatile tool for social science and communication researchers. This technique has also been adopted for several historical and political researches by scholars. Holsti, 1968, suggested that content analysis is any technique for making inferences by systematically and objectively identifying specified characteristics of messages. Content analysis is also defined as a research tool for determining the presence of certain meanings or concepts within texts or within sets of texts. The researchers basically quantify and analyze the presence of meanings and relationships of such meanings with every word, and then eventually draw inferences about the messages within the text or the writers or the audiences. It also involves understanding meanings of culture and time of which these forms a part. Well, generally the text can be diverse and broadly includes books, book chapters, essays, discussions, interviews, newspaper, headlines and stories, articles, historical documents, speeches, conversations, advertising, theatre, informal conversation or any occurrence of communicative language. Different types of occurrences can also represent texts. Content analysis in its broader sense as a methodology developed for studying media content within social science framework and adopting an essentially linear view of communication. So, to make the position of content analysis more clear, in the definition that states as a research technique for making replicable and valid inferences from data to their context. A cautious examination of the definitions of the method content analysis show importance placed on aspects such as system, objectivity, quantification, context and validity with reference to the interpretations drawn from the communication content about the sender, message or text or the receiver of the message. Therefore, content analysis is largely about making effective, replicable, valid and objective conclusions about the message on the basis of clear rules. The material required for content analysis can be in form of letters, diaries, media content, traditional songs, short stories, documents or any symbols, etc. With a thoughtful interpretation, we notice that these definitions of content analysis suggest a constructivist reconceptualization of quantitative measurement. Content analysis is basically descriptive. Through this technique, certain well-defined textual elements or features are measured in several ways. For instance, the expanse of newspaper coverage of certain issues, the topic of television news programs, the occurrence of specific symbols in fictional genres, and others. Such quantitative descriptions of the characteristics of a group of texts or messages are then usually used as a basis for more general interpretations about the meaning of these texts and their repercussions regarding several social phenomena. Strengths of content analysis. Content analysis is usually considered a time-consuming process, yet it has its strengths. This research technique looks directly at communication via text or transcripts, getting into the central aspect of social interaction. Content analysis, when applied to find meanings in text, it is quite an inexpensive technique in that context. It provides for valuable historical as well as cultural insights by analyzing of text. Content analysis can provide an in-depth insight into complex models of human thoughts and language usage. In content analysis, it is comparatively easy to get material, including from the past or record. This becomes easier for press analysis as complete archives usually exist. It is a little more difficult for television, which is not usually so thoroughly archived. Interestingly, it can deal equally easily with current as well as past events. Scholars from several disciplines like social sciences, mass communication, political science, history, language and psychological studies use content analysis as a technique. Interestingly, it is vastly used in social science and media communication research. It has been used predominantly to understand a wide range of themes such as social change dynamics, cultural symbols, changing trends in the theoretical content of different disciplines, authorship, verification, and changes in media content like nature of news coverage on different socio-cultural political issues. Content analysis of messages is often used with effect studies or gratification studies of audience. In terms of addressing the meaning of text, the researcher is concerned with mainly films, television programs, radio programs, newspaper articles, websites, magazines, music, and so on. In the political economy perspective, it is important to recognize the role of media in the modern capitalist system. So, content analysis is required for understanding the economic status and for making sense of the media message meanings. Before we proceed further, we need to have a proper understanding of the term text. So, by applying the linear model of communication, we can relate text here with media messages in which the meaning exists separately from the encoder and decoder. This meaning is also consistent with the positivist and post-positivist approaches, where message is more like a vessel into which information or meaning is placed to be transmitted from one person to another, that is, from sender to receiver. However, a vessel or the message by its nature is unable to determine the information that is placed on it. The positivist and the post-positivist paradigms are relatively more powerful in communication research, but have little influence on specifically media and cultural studies. While elaborating further on the concept of text, it can be observed that literary studies conventionally refers to plays, poems or novels as text in a linear manner. Though over the years, literary studies refer to text much similar to that of media or cultural studies under the influence of linguistic way of interpretation. Content analysis of messages and text has been often used with effects or uses and gratification studies of audience. Literary criticism, that has always been part of the humanities, has not been usually interested in the audiences. Rather, it reads text both as messages as well as aesthetic objects. It is quite impossible to talk about textual analysis without talking about the institutions that produce those messages or texts and the audiences who consume them. The term content analysis can be broadly used for referring to any examination of content of text or messages, or narrowly for referring to a particular methodology developed within social science. Content analysis sees the messages as coded representations of the real world that is somewhat fixed and coherent. It is the responsibility of the researcher to pin or code the meaning and interpret its implications specifically. Its effects on passive audiences. Content analysis can be either quantitative or qualitative or both. But this technique largely falls under the category of quantitative approach, as obviously numerical percentages imply more precision than terms like fewer or more, but all are quantitative. Let us understand this point with a very easy example. Say for instance, if a researcher intends to measure how much violence is there on television programs and whether it has changed over a period of time or not, he would be using the technique of content analysis for scientifically confirming the intuition. Now, let us take another example for having an in-depth understanding. Further, one may also be interested in studying how gender or race are projected on television programs and whether that projection has undergone any change over a period of time or not. So, to reach to the inferences, the researcher will measure that representation now and will have it compared either with earlier representations or with similar studies that have been done in the past. So, the most sophisticated forms of textual analysis within the social sciences, like discourse analysis or conversation analysis, means to analyze how audiences understand messages and how interested are they in the process of making meaning rather than just in the meaning itself. Gathering and analyzing textual data. The term content analysis indicates a distinction between content or form, and so from this perspective, linear model of communication, audiences might be presumed as passive and undifferentiated or socially differentiated and active. It can be either ways, but it is nonetheless assumed that they receive pretty much the same message as meaning is coherent and inherent in the text. Content analysis helps in the coding of the text as per systematic and objective rules and in drawing inferences from the data. What we have learned in our earlier modules is that there are mainly two families of research on text. That is, research concerning content and meaning, and research concerning structure and discourse. Further, within each of these, there are both qualitative and quantitative approaches, and there is considerable interaction between these two approaches. Quantitative approach that also includes other classical semiotic and structural analysis separates out the gathering of data and the process of analysis. On the other hand, qualitative approach that includes phenomenology and hermeneutics, post-structuralist analysis. Discourse analysis omits the difference between data gathering and analysis. It is the pursuit for scientific reliability and validity that has led to the refinement and standardization of techniques. However, content analysis still consists in taking a sample of media, establishing categories of content, measuring the presence of each category within the sample, and interpreting the results, usually against some external criteria. Content analysis is not concerned with people and thus avoids using the term population. This technique is relatively ill-suited for the analysis of visual communication beyond the identification of types of protagonists or formal features. Given its categorical conception of meaning, that is context-dependent and continuous features of visuals, qualitative disclosure analysis is considered to be more appropriate in this regard. We know that scientific experiment generally involves counting of discrete entities or uses quantification for dividing continuums. However, media content analysis does not deal specifically with quantifiable entities, so in that case, even if the categories have been well defined, measuring them has never been easy. There are particular problems with establishing units of measuring different media contents, like measurement of movement across time in movies and television, or measurement of spatial relations in a photograph, or a placement of photographs, or measuring columns, inches in newspapers, etc. Thus, measurement is done on a standardized coding manner or sheet that are developed to suit the needs of projects in hand. Despite its significant limitations, this technique is widely used by researchers when appropriate. Interestingly, like other similar textual research techniques, content analysis accepts a linear model of communication process despite the methodological differences. Content analysis assumes that meaning is already there in the message or text that is yet to be uncovered. It also grows out of the positivist or post-positivist intellectual framework with its belief embedded deep in a realist ontology. The assertion of content analysis is that the only true knowledge is scientific and is faith in the growth of neutral and provable knowledge through the scientific method. One major advantage of content analysis is the capacity to account for large texts or messages seen as combined wholes like, for example, a complete movie or a week's television news program, etc. Further, this technique also gives holistic attention to how small elements like the signs and codes analyzed by semiotics fall into meaningful patterns. It denies relying upon intuition in reading of text. From whatever I've told you so far, we develop this understanding that content analysis may be directed at discovering the explicit meaning of the text or the latent meaning. Thus, researches on media are often linked to a search for the ideological content. Interestingly, researches on audiences, institutions, and texts blend perfectly with each other. For instance, when the research is directed towards understanding how news functions as discourse, it no longer pursues a meaning already in the text, but rather considers how meaning is basically constructed in the process of production or reading of texts or messages. Conclusion. This module has outlined the concepts of the content analysis technique for examining media texts, recognizing the division into quantitative and qualitative studies. Content analysis in any form is concerned with the meanings of textual or visual or communicative elements. Unlike the research data on audiences, media messages like newspaper articles, radio or television programs, web series as well as cultural sites such as beaches or shopping malls generally are in existence much before the research that seeks to understand them. To sum up, content analysis is definitely one useful research technique in social science discipline for analyzing texts or messages. This technique offers objective guidelines in the coding of the text and to gather conclusions from the collected data. A successful content analysis research is assumed to be the outcome of a series of good objective decisions. The process starts from the point of deciding whether the method is appropriate to study the topic under research or not. It is followed by clearly setting out the objectives, taking decisions concerning units of analysis, developing content, categories and sampling period. Like any other technique, content analysis too has its limitations, yet it is considered as one research method that has abundant potential for studying beliefs, organizations, outlooks and human relations. With this, we have come to the end of today's lesson on content analysis. That is all that we had for you for today. Thank you so much for watching. Till the next time, it's a goodbye.